Welcome to Cars, Hackers, and Cybersecurity. Here we break down the latest in automotive cybersecurity, helping you stay ahead in building secure, connected vehicles.
Okay, imagine this. You pull into your driveway, right? And park your car. And it's not just a car anymore. It's basically a mobile data center. Every camera, every sensor, all the software, it's constantly grabbing information about where you are, about you, where you've been. Now, here's the thing that really makes you stop and think. What if some of that really essential tech, buried deep inside your car's system, what if it was designed or developed or maybe just influenced by a foreign government? That's exactly what we're going to unpack in this deep dive. We're getting into the recent U.S. government ban on connected vehicle hardware and software, specifically stuff coming from China and Russia. Our source today is a really great article by Durga Adusamili. It's called The Auto Tech War. U.S. ban on China and Russia leaves industry scrambling. Came out just a few months back, March 6th, 2025. So our mission here is to sort of navigate this whole geopolitical tech situation, understand what the ban actually covers, shine a light on the huge challenges it's creating for the entire auto supply chain globally, and ultimately figure out what it means for the future of the cars you drive. So let's start with the big why. Why is the U.S. government suddenly so focused on tech from these specific countries, especially when it comes to our cars? I mean, they seem pretty harmless, right?
Well, at its heart, the reason is pretty straightforward. It's about safeguarding national security. For the last 10 years or so, the U.S. has been, maybe quietly, but definitely consistently, regulating data flows and restricting ICT, that's information and communications tech, from places like China and Russia. This isn't exactly new. It really stems from these ongoing worries about cyber espionage, potential attacks on critical infrastructure. And there have been quite a few documented cases, discoveries of hidden backdoors in hardware and software coming in, sort of secret ways in, used to collect data, monitor what's going on inside the U.S. What's really fascinating and maybe a bit alarming now is how vehicle connectivity and automated driving systems are right in the middle of this. They're uniquely vulnerable.
Vulnerable how?
Think about it. Modern cars, they've got multiple cameras, right? Constantly mapping cities in real time while you're just driving around. Now, if that incredibly detailed map data gets sent to a foreign cloud, say one based in China, your car basically becomes a mobile surveillance tool for another government.
Wow.
And it goes deeper than that. Software-defined vehicles, they collect really sensitive personal data about drivers, owners, driving habits, maybe even financial info. All that could potentially be accessed maliciously. And then there's the really chilling idea, the remote manipulation of whole fleets of vehicles by foreign adversaries.
You mean like taking control?
Exactly. Imagine the disruption, the potential chaos if someone could hijack thousands of vehicles at once for, truly nefarious purposes.
Okay, that's quite a picture. And a terrifying one. So this isn't just like personal data breaches we worry about with websites.
No, it's potentially more significant.
It's the data itself being weaponized, turning everyday convenience into, a national security threat. That's a huge shift in how you think about just owning a car. So given that chilling reality, let's drill down a bit. What exactly is the government doing about this? What's in this new rule? And when does it actually take effect?
Right. So the Department of Commerce, they finalized this rule back on January 14th, 2025. And it's pretty comprehensive. The ban specifically goes after vehicle connectivity systems, VCS, and automated driving systems, ADS. We're talking passenger cars here. And it's a flat-out ban. Prohibition on selling or importing whole connected vehicles or vehicles that just incorporate certain hardware or software components linked to entities in China or Russia.
Okay, so it's components too, not just the finished car.
Exactly. And when we talk software, it's basically everything. The OS, middleware, apps, even the back-end systems that support the car. But, and this is really important, firmware and open source software are specifically exempt.
Oh, interesting. Exempt.
Yeah. Now, the software bans, those are set to take effect for the 2027 model year vehicles. Hardware bans come a bit later for the 2030 model year. And to make sure everyone's playing by the rules, OEMs, the car manufacturers, they have to submit these annual declarations of conformity.
Declarations of conformity.
Yeah.
Sounds official.
It is. They need to provide really detailed info about their VCS hardware, the covered software, and crucially, the documentation showing they did their due diligence to check the origins.
Wait, hang on. Firmware and open source are exempt. That seems like a pretty big gap, doesn't it? I mean, so much modern software relies on that stuff. Does that kind of weaken the whole point of the ban? Or is there some strategic reason for letting those slide?
That's a really good question. And the thinking there, it's mostly pragmatic. Firmware, well, it's often baked really deep into the hardware chips themselves. Trying to figure out its origin and separate it out is incredibly complex, sometimes almost impossible.
Okay.
And as for open source, I mean, that's developed globally, collaboratively, trying to ban every bit of open source that might have had some contribution from someone in China or Russia. You'd essentially grind modern software development to a halt. So much the tech world runs on open source.
Right. It's everywhere.
Exactly. So it's kind of a calculated trade-off, balancing the security goals with what's actually feasible technologically and, the reality of how software is built today.
Okay, that makes sense. Pragmatism wins out there. But even with those exemptions, this still sounds like a massive headache, a huge lift for the car companies. So what does this really mean for the OEMs, the big manufacturers, and that whole vast network of suppliers they depend on?
Oh, you're absolutely right. The repercussions are enormous. They spread far and wide across the whole auto supply chain. Think about it on an individual level first. The rule covers any Chinese or Russian citizen or resident who isn't a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. So let's say you have a freelance software developer, maybe a Russian citizen working remotely from Cyprus. They develop some code for a tier 3 supplier.
A supplier's supplier.
Right. And that code ends up in a component that goes into a car sold in the U.S. That single developer's work could now make that component and potentially the car non-compliant.
Wow, that's granular.
It is. And then at the company level, it gets even more complex. Any entity that China or Russia can directly or indirectly influence. That could be through ownership, where it's legally based, shareholder structures, even just having people on the board of directors. All fall into this.
So influence is key.
Definitely. Take Volvo Cars, for instance, owned by Geely, a Chinese holding company. This immediately raises a huge question. Does Volvo need to completely change its ownership structure? Or maybe even pull back from certain markets to comply by 2027? It's a major strategic dilemma for them.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And remember, a typical OEM, they're integrating software from maybe over 100 different vendors. And those vendors have their own suppliers. So the commercial implications, the ripple effect for the car makers, and their massive supplier networks, it's just immense. Huge disruption potential.
That Volvo example really brings it home. But like you said, what about all those smaller suppliers? Or even individual engineers scattered around the globe? How on earth can an OEM realistically drill down that far to check influence and ownership for every tiny piece of code or hardware? Which leads to, I guess, the critical question. How do you actually prove you're conforming when the supply chain is just so tangled and complex?
You've nailed the core problem right there. Because knowing what's in the car is one challenge. Proving where every bit came from, that's a whole other level. OEMs have to submit this declaration, basically saying, yep, none of our stuff is from China or Russia under these rules, and they need proof, hard evidence.
Okay.
But just identifying all the relevant bits inside the car's systems, that's a monumental job. A modern car might have, 50 plus ECUs? These little computers running everything?
Yeah, easily.
And each ECU could have dozens of software libraries pulled from tons of different suppliers. It's so layered. The reality is often the OEMs, even their main tier 1 suppliers, the big guys they deal with directly, they aren't always fully aware of exactly what software is inside the components they get from their suppliers further down the chain.
So they might not even know.
Exactly. In many situations, the problematic component, the sort of culprit piece of code or hardware, it's buried maybe 3-4 levels deep in the supply chain.
Like digging for digital artifacts.
It really is. It's kind of similar to the challenges they already face with software vulnerabilities scanning, finding security holes. That's mandatory now under UNR 155 rules. They're going to need really sophisticated tools just to find software developed by foreign nationals or entities covered by the ban.
Think about your earlier point. A software company uses Chinese subcontractors. Their code gets bundled into a middleware stack.
That's the software that helps different car systems talk to each other, right? Precisely. That sort of digital glue. Now, how does the car manufacturer peer inside that complex middleware layer, find those specific pieces from the subcontractor, and then deal with the risk? It's not like ticking boxes on a checklist. It needs deep technical insight, advanced scanning. Honestly, it feels like looking for a needle in a haystack that's constantly growing and has multiple dimensions.
A multi-dimensional growing haystack doesn't sound easy.
Not at all. And that complexity, it leads directly into several major hurdles that the whole industry, OEMs, suppliers, they're all grappling with right now. First off, just the sheer scope of the rule. It's very broad. While the government's intention is clear national security, the actual expectations lack a lot of specific detail. And, the devil's always in the details.
Always.
MIMA, that's the big trade group for auto suppliers in North America, they've already raised big concerns, especially about things like ADAS, the advanced driver assistance systems, and BMS, the battery management systems. Are all components in those covered? It's also not totally clear what needs to be banned in back-end systems, the cloud stuff, or related telecom services. And maybe most importantly, there's no clear guidance on the acceptance criteria. Like, how do you definitively prove a component is okay or not okay? What's the standard?
So lots of ambiguity still.
A fair bit, yes. Then there's the timeline. If you connect this to how cars actually developed, those cycles are long. Software bans for 2027 models, hardware for 2030. It sounds like a way off, but for car companies, that's practically tomorrow.
Because they plan years ahead.
Exactly. They've already started designing, developing, sourcing parts for vehicles coming out around then. If they suddenly have to back out of contracts, change suppliers, redesign systems, we're talking huge financial losses, massive disruption. It's not like swapping one bolt for another on the line. It's potentially re-engineering core systems midstream.
Huge inertia.
Immense. Which is why MEMA has formally asked for a 2-year extension. They're citing the supply chain complexity, the sheer amount of due diligence needed just to figure things out.
Understandable. And hurdle number 3.
Intellectual property, IP. This is a big worry. If companies have to submit these super detailed software bills of materials, SBOMs, and hardware bills of materials, HBOMs, to the government.
Basically lists of all the ingredients.
Right. There's a real fear that doing so could expose their secret sauce, their proprietary IP, potentially to competitors if that information isn't handled incredibly carefully. So they're caught in this balancing act. How do we comply with this critical security rule without giving away the confidential information that makes our products unique and competitive?
Okay, broad scope, tight timeline, IP risks. It definitely sounds like a minefield. So with all these challenges, what is the path forward? How can companies even start to tackle this? It seems almost overwhelming.
Well, it is overwhelming, but there are paths emerging. OEMs are going to absolutely need sophisticated tools, new processes, and frankly, the right expertise to identify and report these banned components. This means using cutting-edge products that can actually scan for Chinese or Russian links and generate the reports needed for that declaration of conformity. PlaxidityX, for instance, they used to be Argus Cybersecurity. They've already updated their software supply chain security product specifically for this. It can scan SBOMs, flag problematic components, help OEMs navigate compliance.
So technology is part of the answer.
A big part. But it's not just scanning. They'll need new risk management processes, tools to properly inspect anything that looks suspicious, and then this is key, a clear plan for replacing those components if needed. It's not enough just to find the problem. You need a solution ready to go.
A remediation plan.
Exactly. And maybe the most crucial piece underlying all of this is a major focus on due diligence. This means setting up really rigorous internal processes, conducting regular audits, maybe even bringing in external third-party assessors right when they're sourcing hardware and software. At the procurement stage.
Be proactive, not reactive.
Precisely. The goal is to catch potential issues early, build compliance in from the start, rather than facing nasty, expensive surprises halfway through development, or worse, when the car's ready to roll out.
Okay, so this deep dive into the U.S. ban on connected vehicle tech from China and Russia, it really throws a spotlight on this critical tension, doesn't it? On one hand, the absolute need to protect national security in a world where everything's connected. On the other, the sheer mind-bending complexity of these global automotive supply chains. It's a massive task for the OEMs, for their suppliers. It demands new tech, more transparency, maybe a fundamental rethink of how cars are even sourced and put together. And as you think about all this, maybe consider beyond just cars for a moment. This ban, driven by national security, it sets a powerful precedent. How might similar worries affect other connected tech you use every single day? You know, your smart speaker, the systems running your city. What could this mean for the global tech supply chain overall? How might it shift things? And what could that mean for future innovation and even the choices you have as a consumer in this increasingly connected world? Definitely something fascinating, maybe a bit unsettling to think about until our next deep dive.
That's all for today's episode. Keep your engines running smooth and your cyber defenses sharp. Stay connected by subscribing and visiting PlaxidityX.com. Until next time, stay safe on the road and in the cloud.